pleasure and my privilege actually to host this evening, this what Tony calls cultural salon, and we have a real opportunity here to kind of keep going what he has started, and I am a major admirer of Tony's, coming to the party fairly late. It was after I published my book that Tony found me, and that allowed me to find him. And we have been kindred spirits since that time. We are about the same objective. We are starting from different points. I'm starting only about 400 years ago, and he's starting, a few thousand. But we're all going to get to the same place. I always say that, Tony, I'm going to do the digging for you, because I feel that we as a people need to know who we aren't before we can really discover who we are. So it's my job to do that. You are not what they say you are, and now that you know that, let's find out who you are. And that's Tony's job, and he is the purveyor of the truth, and he is a master teacher. And I am very pleased to have him talk to us tonight. And without any further delay, let's bring the master teacher to tell us the truth.
Right. Thank you.
Can I leave?
Sure.
Okay.
I've known this brother for about a year, but it's like, the relationship is as if we've grown up together and antagonized each other and helped each other and built together. So he is like the big brother I never had. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure for both Tom and Madeline to open up their lovely home to myself, my wife Jan, and to extend an invitation to all of you to share in what we hope will become a memorable experience. That is, we're taking the time today. Tom has opened his house to us today so that we can have this cultural salon. The cultural salon is not unlike the events that African Americans used to have around the turn of last century, as they were preparing themselves to begin to shape the consciousness of the second generation removed from slavery, to step into the 20th century prepared to find their place, to make their place in the world. So we gather here today to continue in that spirit and to begin to talk about what we can do to ensure that our children's children's children will have a place for themselves in the world. I'm here specifically to talk to you about a project that I've been involved in for 3 years now. It's a project entitled the Asa Restoration Project, and it comes out of my travels and my experiences to Egypt. Let me give you a little background before I actually begin my presentation. For those of you who don't know, I'm born and raised in Chicago, but I left Chicago, born on the west side. I left Chicago 40 years ago to attend Howard University. And after graduating from Howard, like most people of my generation, I felt a sense of emptiness. I was prepared to go out into the world, but there was something else missing. And what I discovered was that something was a greater understanding of who I was as a person of African ancestry. And it was in 1977 when I met a Ghanaian author by the name of Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, who had just published They Came Before Columbus. Listening to Dr. Van Sertima, and I learned for the first time in my life the Egyptians were black. And it contradicted something that I remember in elementary school. I did a paper on Egypt, and I used the World Book Encyclopedia to help me write my paper about Egypt. And in the World Book Encyclopedia, they described the ancient Egyptians as dark-skinned Caucasians. So all of my life, I grew up with other people defining our reality. So once I began to learn that the ancient Egyptians looked like me, it caused me to begin to read as much as I could about this ancient African culture and civilization. And in 1980, I made my first trip to the Nile with Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen. And those 13 days that I spent on the Nile changed my life forever. This past July, I made my 47th trip to Egypt. 47 trips in 30 years. And I'm just now really beginning to understand why I have made all of these trips, why I've spent so much time traveling to the Nile, writing, researching, and lecturing about Nile Valley culture and civilization. In 2007, one of my dearest friends, Dr. Asa G. Hilliard, passed while we were in Egypt at a conference, the ASCAC conference, the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations. And his death shocked all of us who knew him and loved him. And I had an opportunity to create an organization to honor the spirit of Dr. Hilliard. So I'm here this evening to talk to you about this project, to share with you work that I'm involved in now, to help you understand why this work is so important, and to invite you to participate in this excavation project. It's called the Asa Restoration Project, which is restoring the tomb of Karakomun, a 25th dynasty priest, and preserving the legacy of Dr. Asa G. Hilliard III. Now, there's a gentleman who we all should know. He is probably one of the most obscure Egyptologists in history. His name is Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop. He was born in Senegal and made a statement that is so simple yet so profound. The history of Black Africa will remain suspended in air and cannot be written correctly until African historians dare to connect it to the history of Egypt. Now, what this African brother was saying is that African people have to prove to European Egyptologists and European scholars that Egypt is in Africa. And this ancient of cultures and civilization was an indigenous African culture and civilization. So I'm proud to stand on the shoulders of many brothers and sisters who have been doing the research, helping us to recover our memory so that we can move forward into this society and into the world, claiming the legacy that is ours to claim. And so many of us have been brainwashed. And just to prove that point, I want to do a very brief quiz to illustrate the power of Mr. Burrell's work, Brainwashed. And I want to ask you a few questions. I'm not putting anybody on the spot. I just would like to receive your honest responses to my questions. And Kwesi, you be quiet. What do you call this structure here? What is this building here? Pyramid. Pyramid, very good. What is this statue in front of the pyramid? Sphinx. The Sphinx. What do you call the country where these two objects are found? Egypt. All right. Now, I'm going to prove this point that there's nothing new in the world except the history you do not know. We've been taught that this building is a pyramid. We've been taught that the oldest sculpture in the world is the Sphinx. We've been taught that the country where these two objects can be found is Egypt. But those answers are incorrect, because all three of those words are Greek words, which came into existence at least 2,500 years after this building was created, after the Sphinx was sculpted, after this country was founded by indigenous African people. So my job, I used to call myself a historian, but after 30 years of researching and trying to teach our history to a people who have been written out of the respectable commentary of history, I come to see myself now as a memory recovery specialist. And my job is to help restore the memories that have been erased. So this object that the Greeks called a pyramid was actually known as mir. The word pyramid means little flat cake. Does this look like a flat cake? Mir is an ancient African word which means the place of ascension. These structures were built over tombs because they were the vehicles through which the souls of the deceased ascended into heaven and were reborn. So when you reclaim the name of a person, place, or thing, you also reclaim the understanding that goes along with that name. The Sphinx is a Greek word which means to strangle or to hold. The African name for that sculpture is Her-em Aket, which means Heru on the horizon. It is the face of Heru, the son of the founding father and mother of the land that the Greeks called Egypt. Egypt is a Greek word. The original name for the country is Kemet. Kemet is a name which in the indigenous language means the town, the city, the nation of the black people, not the black soil as National Geographic would have you believe. So it's important, critically important for us to see our history through our own ancestral eyes. When we study the history of Kemet, we realize that Kemet was the first nation, the oldest documented nation in existence. It was also a nation of many firsts. The people of Kemet were responsible for dividing the day into 24 hours, creating the first calendar of 365 and a quarter days. The calendar that we still use today was created by Africans in the Nile Valley as late as 4,230 BCE. That's not African history, that is world history. They created theological and spiritual systems which are still being used in the world today, although they are referred to or have been interpreted through the cultural lens of other people. But it's still an African spiritual tradition. Kemet gave us the first government, ruled by a king, the first nation of civil servants, who were the architects, the engineers, the teachers, the healers. They established the first middle class in recorded history. And that is a part of our story. So as we tell this story, we have to begin to place Kemet squarely in Africa. And we have to understand that the civilization of Kemet migrated northward down the Nile. It began in inner Africa and migrated northward down the Nile. Dr. Asa Hilliard, on his many study tours to Egypt, gave us a conceptual framework with which we could understand the history of Kemet. He divided Kemet into 4 golden ages, periods of high development. The first golden age was dynasties 3 through 6, when all the great mirrors were created. The second golden age was dynasties 11 through 12, when all of the great literature was written. The great spiritual texts, the philosophical texts. The first human beings to write left evidence of their accomplishments. Dynasties 18 and 19 were responsible for building many of the temples and other structures that millions of people travel to Egypt today to visit. The 25th dynasty was the 4th golden age, the period in time which Dr. John Henry Clarke refers to as Africa's last great walk in the sun. Kemet had fallen on hard times. She was subjected to invasions from the north and from the west, and it was Africans from the south who came north into Kemet to rescue the land of their ancestors. These were their words. And the 25th dynasty represents the oldest documented Renaissance in history. It was an act of Sankofa. And so one of the things that we have to do battle with is the effort to remove African people from the land of their birth. These are images created by the Africans themselves in Kemet, which showed you who they look like. These are images of the Kushites. They are the same people. It wasn't until at least 2,500 years after Kemet had been established that the first Europeans came into Kemet as conquerors. And then Kemet became Egypt. The images of the statues, the complexion of the people changed at the end, and those invaders added nothing new to the culture and civilization. The Kushites, during the 25th dynasty, drove out the Libyans and restored the land of their ancestors. And it was one of the highest periods of ancient Kemetic culture, art, philosophy, and literature. So we know this, beyond a shadow of a doubt. We know that 6,253 years after the founding of Kemet, and 2,758 years after the 25th dynasty, we now know that the past has been erased and the erasure has been forgotten. We now know that ancient facts were falsified and presented as historical truths in order to separate Kush from Kemet, Kemet from Egypt, Egypt from Africa, and African people from their own history and culture. This is the cultural war that we're fighting right now in the 21st century. And so, in an effort to fight this war and win this war, we're doing our research. This is my latest publication, Finding Karakamun, the collaborative rediscovery of a lost tomb. And it documents the work that we're doing thanks to this woman here, Dr. Lena Pistakova, who is a Russian-born Egyptologist, trained in the United States, received her degree in Egyptology at New York University. She is one of the foremost experts on the art and history of the 25th dynasty. She worked for a number of years for the Metropolitan Museum doing excavations and restorations on the west bank of Luxor. And in her spare time, she was looking for this 25th dynasty tomb, which was last seen in the 1970s by a European archaeologist. She found the tomb of Karakamun, in 2006. And when she went to her employer at the Metropolitan Museum, told them of her discovery, and requested financial assistance to aid in the excavation, they told her in no uncertain terms to leave this alone. They said that these are not your people. But she said this is history, and it shows a relationship between the 25th dynasty and the 18th dynasty, the 12th dynasty, and the 3rd and 4th dynasty. Leave it alone. The 25th dynasty is the only period in ancient Egyptian history which European Egyptologists will acknowledge was a black dynasty. All the other dynasties they claim was a non-African dynasty. And Dr. Pistakova knew in that tomb that she discovered was the evidence which would unravel all of these lies. And so, because she didn't receive any financing, she quit her job at the Metropolitan Museum, used her own money to finance the excavation. When she ran out of funds, she tapped into her 401k. When she exhausted her 401k, she began using her credit cards. When she maxed out her credit card, she started tapping into her daughter's college fund. When I met her in July of 2008, she had run out of money. And as you can imagine, this woman was desperate. She took me into this tomb, and when I saw what was there, I made a commitment to her to help raise money to spread news of the discovery. And that fall, we established the ASA Restoration Project as our vehicle to help restore the tomb of Karakamun. So I would like to show you what we have done through the financial contributions of African Americans. I want to show you what we have done over the last 3 years. The tomb of Karakamun is in an area on the west bank of Luxor, Egypt, known as South Asasif. South Asasif is sandwiched between the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens, right near an area known as the Valley, the Tomb of the Nobles. And this is the site where the tomb was located, in a village where the chief of the village and the other residents in this small community had a habit of building their homes over tombs. And they would drill holes in their floors, go into the tombs, rob the tombs of their contents, and sell them on the white market in order to finance their lifestyle. And so she literally had to bribe the chief of this village, Abdullah El Rasul, who is a descendant of the Rasul family, the most notorious tomb robbers in all of Egypt. They have been robbing the tombs of our ancestors for over 150 years. They are experts. And so she found this tomb, which was built approximately 30 feet under the earth. The ceiling of the tomb collapsed in the 1990s. And so in that indentation in the desert, the members of the Rasul village used this hole in the ground as a garbage dump. So by the time she came to that site, this is an image of Karakamun, who was the first Akh priest at Karnak Temple. This is where Karakamun worked. Karnak Temple is the largest temple complex ever built by humans on this planet. It is a mile wide and a mile and a half deep. It is inside of this temple where the chapel of Amen. Amen is that aspect of the Creator that we know within Judeo-Christianity as Amen. In the Kemetic language, Amen means hidden or concealed. And it represents the unseen power of this omnipotent force of creation. This is where Karakamun worked every day. The temple of Karnak is on the east bank of Luxor. When Dr. Lena came to that site in 2006, she found a garbage dump. She hired workers who literally in 115-degree heat removed thousands and thousands of pounds of garbage. And as they began to remove the debris, they dug down deeper and deeper into the earth. And they ultimately began to find things. They found the top portion of the tomb. And as they dug down, they found glyphs. They found carvings and wall paintings. So let me just show you in this next series of slides the work that's been done the last 3 years that we've been involved with the project, the last 3 years that we've been financing this project. This is the tomb. We would enter the tomb through the west and come down a ramp into the tomb where we would begin our excavation. This is 2008, this is 2009, and by 2010 we had completely excavated the first pillared hall. The tomb is divided into two sections, first pillared hall and the second pillared hall. This is a slide that shows you what we've done last year. The first pillared hall consists of 8 pillars, 8 10-foot high pillars which supported the ceiling. And all of this collapsed in the 1990s. So the ceiling, pieces of the pillar, the walls were all in the debris which had to be removed, had to be excavated and removed. And then our goal last year was to begin the excavation in the second pillared hall. Let me just show you a contrast of last year, 2010, and the work we just finished this past summer in July. So you can see the difference between the first pillared hall and the second pillared hall. We actually began reconstructing the first of the 8 pillars in the first pillared hall. While we were there last year, excavating in the second pillared hall, we were running short of funds. It costs approximately $8,000 to $10,000 a month to excavate. We have approximately 76 people who work for us. We have diggers, excavators, conservators, supervisors, and we have a weekly payroll to meet. And because of the fact that we were running short on donations, I found myself trying to find ways that we could expedite the excavation process. And one of the ways, one of my methods of expediting the excavation process was by communing with my brother Karakamoon, asking him for guidance, asking him for assistance. So one afternoon as we were digging and payroll was several days away and I knew that we needed to concentrate our efforts, I asked Karakamoon to help us. I told him that we had come to this site not as grave robbers, but as restorers. We were there to restore his tomb and to restore his legacy. And I asked him if he could tell me where we should be digging in order to find the stairs that would lead to his burial chamber. And a voice that I would go to my grave knowing was more inspiration than imagination said, have them dig right here in this area. And so I asked Dr. Lena to pull a couple of guys off the detail and they started digging. And about 2 days later, I was in another part of the tomb when I heard her cry out, Tony, Tony, we found it. We found stairs leading down into the earth. And they began digging. They began digging at a time when I had to return to the States to prepare to bring one of my study tours to Egypt and also to get some additional funds. So I was going for about 2 weeks. And when I returned in early August, I returned with my daughter, Atlantis Browder. Some of you may know her from her first book, which we wrote 21 years ago when she was 8 years old. I took her on a trip to Egypt, and when she was 8, we published her first book, My First Trip to Africa, which at that time made her the youngest published author in America. And so she returned to Egypt with me last August, and we went into this hole that the excavators had carved out of the limestone rock, which led into the burial compartment. So she climbed into the burial compartment over pieces of limestone. Now, the tomb itself, the floor of the tomb itself is about 25 to 30 feet below ground level. And this burial compartment that we're entering is about another 10 feet below the ground. So we're now about 40 feet below ground level. And here's Atlantis coming inside of the burial compartment with my colleague, Dr. Kushite behind her. And when we stepped inside of the burial compartment, in the corner of that room was a shaft about 6 feet by 5 feet wide, dug in the limestone bedrock. And that shaft went down into the earth another 26 feet. At that time, we did not have a 30-foot ladder at the site. So the workers tied 2 15-foot ladders together and put them in the shaft so that we could make our way down into the burial chamber of Karakamun. And I photographed my daughter Atlantis as she descended the ladder, came down into the shaft, and as she stood at the base of the ladder, at the entrance to the burial chamber of Karakamun, I made an executive decision as her father to allow her to go in first so that she could be the first African American in history to go inside of the tomb of Karakamun. And this is what we found. Wow. This tomb is over 2,700 years old. It had already been raided by the notorious Rasul family. They robbed it of its contents. They even went so far as to fill the burial chamber and the shaft with debris. So as we were excavating this shaft, this 26-foot deep shaft, we pulled out pieces of rock, pieces of sand, pieces of furniture. We pulled out the carcass of a water buffalo. They had no respect whatsoever for the tombs of our ancestors. And here we are sitting in a room that has a floor-to-ceiling height of about 7 feet. But you'll see that my head is just about scraping the ceiling. We're sitting on top of about 4 feet of debris. So my daughter and I spent a week in this burial chamber excavating, cataloging, and photographing the contents of this tomb. And as we were digging one morning, my daughter shouted out to me and said, "Daddy, Daddy, look what I found." And she had this object in her hand. Look at that object. Can you identify it? Here's a close-up shot. Do you see what she's holding? She's holding the mummified hand of a child. We had already found 2 adult skulls in that tomb, which led us to believe at that time that this was a family burial chamber, probably consisting of the bodies of Karakamun, his wife, and their child. Now, the image on the ceiling of the tomb is an image of the sky goddess Nut. And I'll come back to her a little bit later, but I want you to see the stairs that we completely excavated, which led down into the burial chamber. The burial chamber itself was comprised of 4 separate tombs, 2 stacked on top of each other and 2 on opposite ends of the burial compartment. Primary tomb where we excavated, the only one that was painted was the tomb of Karakamun. But at the foot of the staircase was this wall covered with Medu Neter. Medu Neter is the writing that the Greeks referred to as hieroglyphics. Medu Neter means the writing or the words of God, the Creator. We discovered, thanks to a scholar from Spain who was there, that these texts were texts known as the pyramid texts from the 6th dynasty pyramid of Unas. The pyramid texts are the oldest religious documents ever found. They were written approximately 2600 BCE, found in the burial chamber below this pyramid of Unas, which is in Saqqara, near the Sept pyramid of Saqqara, which you see here in the background. And it is within these texts, the pyramid texts, where it is written the place where the soul of the deceased goes into the heavens to be reborn. It is the first example of human beings talking about the rebirth of the soul, talking about the judgment of the soul, and the journey that the soul makes in order to be reborn in heaven. We're talking about African spirituality that existed at least 800 years before Abraham. This is our story. This is our history. This is the painting of the sky goddess Nut, painted on the ceiling. The colors are still vibrant. 2,700 years old, the colors are still vibrant. Nut is the ancient African personality, goddess if you will, who represents the sky. And she swallows the red disk of the sun as it sets in the west, and she gives birth to it in the morning as the sun rises in the east as Kepre, a Kemetic term which means rebirth. In the high noon, the sun is known as Re, and when it sets in the west and is swallowed by Nut, it is called Amen, which means hidden or concealed. But in this image of the nighttime sky, we also find constellations, stars, groups of stars, and specifically 2 stars that are located here to the right of Nut, the star of Sept and her son and her husband, Asar, who were the founding parents of Kemet. Sept is associated with a star that the ancient Kemites referred to as Sept. We know Sept better by its Greek name, Sirius, the eastern star. And the star to the right of Sept is the star of her husband, Asar, who is known as Sahu. That constellation of stars was known to the Kemites as Sahu. We know that constellation better by its Greek name, Orion. And it is the constellation of Orion where the souls of the deceased go to be reborn. All of this is documented and it's laid out accurately in the ceiling of the tomb of Karakamun as it is in the nighttime sky. They studied the heavens, and they knew very clearly the path that the souls of the deceased must take in order to be reborn. So here's a photograph of my daughter and I last summer in the burial chamber of Karakamun. And here's a photograph just a month and a half ago after we had excavated the tomb. And we're now able to stand in this burial chamber. Here's a photograph of her hand to hand with her sister, Sept, literally touching the sky. Now, our excavations this year were really something. It was a heart-stopping experience. It was also a heart-breaking experience because we would find things that we thought prepared us for new discoveries, only to find that they were not what we thought they were. And you don't know that because what you're looking for is under 2, 3, 4 feet of debris. And as you excavate, you find things. Here is the floor of the burial chamber of Karakamun as we were in the process of excavating it. And at one point, here I am with my mask, doing my job. We worked 6 hours a day at this site, 6 days a week. We found, in this particular tomb, we found no less than a half dozen skulls, maybe a dozen arms and legs. So we now suspect that the Rasul used this burial chamber to store mummies that they had stolen from other tombs. But to our surprise, as the workers were excavating, they found a corner in the floor, which led us to believe that this corner, that there was probably a shaft or a staircase that led to another room. So we were quite excited, the hopes that we would find something new in the tomb of Karakamun. But after a week's worth of excavation, we found out that instead of it being another shaft or a staircase, it was a coffin pit. This was the pit where Karakamun's coffin was placed and his body was placed inside of the coffin. All of this was destroyed. Every single piece was destroyed. And we were literally picking up pieces of body, coffin, pieces of mummy wrapping, pieces of jewelry which they discarded. And all of this was cataloged. And here Dr. Lena is standing inside of the coffin pit talking about what this latest discovery means. But it helps us to tell the story of a man who has been written out of his own history. We found in this particular tomb fingers of mummies. Here you see one finger on the left, which is covered with 24-karat gold leaf. That is a sign of royalty, because all of the fingers of mummies were covered with gold leaf and then had gold caps placed on their fingers and their toes. So we believe that Karakamoon may have been a member of the royal family, may have been a son or a brother of Shabaka or Shabiku, the second and third kings of the 25th dynasty. We know that he lived during their reign. We found teeth, dozens of sets of teeth in this tomb. And then we also found in the second pillared hall 2 additional shafts and 2 additional tombs. Karakamoon's tomb is a tomb that just kept giving. We never knew what we would find as we were excavating. And what was exciting about this particular tomb that I'm about to descend into is that at the entrance to his tomb were portions of a name, the last few letters of a name, and the words, his brother. So we believe that this shaft and tomb may have once held the remains of Karakamoon's brother. But of course, it's already been robbed. I spent a couple of days in that tomb, pulled out several skulls and mummified arms and legs. We are literally picking up the pieces behind the Rasul family. The tomb of Karakamoon has given us a number of profound artifacts that will allow us to rewrite the history of the 25th dynasty. There are many attributes of the 25th dynasty that contemporary Egyptologists have associated with the 26th dynasty. But we have been able to find wonderful examples of Kemetic art that we can firmly place in the first part of the 25th dynasty. Karakamoon's tomb was the second tomb built during the 25th dynasty, and it is the largest Kushite tomb ever found to date, the largest and most exquisite tomb ever created. Here is an image, a wonderful, larger than life-size image of Karakamoon, sitting in a pose that the pose, the furniture, and the clothing are a direct throwback to the Old Kingdom. So what the 25th dynasty did was to reach back 2,000 years and bring the best of their ancestors into the present moment. That act is known as retroactive remembrances, or as we call it, Sankofa. Bringing the past into the present in order to build for the future. What they also did that was really interesting is that the standard for drawings and carvings in ancient Kemet was the grid system. The standard grid system was comprised of 18 squares to a grid. The Kushites introduced a 21 square grid system, which allowed them to make more finely detailed carvings. It's like the difference between a 5 megapixel camera and a 15 megapixel camera. The smaller the squares, the more detailed the final piece of artwork. So they made a number of innovations that are literally helping us to rewrite the history of Kemet. So as I was the only bald-headed person there at the tomb, some of the guys there began to notice a similarity between myself and my brother Karakamoon. And I don't mind claiming that heritage. Now, I want to show you the site, the excavated site from this season, from July of 2011, and a floor plan of the tomb, which gives you a general idea of what we found. The first pillared hall is comprised of 8 pillars, and on each of the pillars are recorded the hours of the day. On the north side of the tomb, you have the 12 hours of the day. On the south side, you have the 12 hours of the night. And on the walls in the first pillared hall, you have passages from the Book of the Dead. So all of these were sacred texts carved on the wall, the ceiling, and the pillars of this tomb, which provided direction to the soul of Karakamoon as he made his way into his Holy of Holies, his sacred burial spot, where he would be reborn in the west as a Tsar before him. In the second pillared hall is where we found there are 4 pillars There's also additional passages from the so-called Book of the Dead, or the text which the ancient Kemites referred to as the chapters of coming forth by day. In other words, the words to be said in order to be reborn into the next life. And here's the staircase which led down to the shaft, which led down to Karakamun's burial chamber. We hope to update this floor plan this year. Now here's another shot of the first and second pillared hall looking toward the east. We have completely excavated the second and first pillared hall, and now our job is to excavate the entrance to this tomb.
One of the most important finds of the 2011 season was the discovery of the shaft and tomb of Karakamun's brother, Nesamenepet. We made this discovery as we were clearing debris from the second pillared hall in July. I'd like you to see this exclusive video footage of my daughter Atlantis helping to remove debris from the shaft, Dr. Lena's daughter Catherine and me at the bottom of the shaft looking into the entrance of the burial chamber, and finally, a look inside this newly discovered tomb.
Miss Atlantis, here at the site, helping to clear out a new shaft here in the tomb of Karakamun. She's going to try her hand at the winch, at the pulley. All right, all right. Give us some slack, give us some slack. Give us some slack. Yes, there you go. All right, now, pull, 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 pull. Hey,
Yeah, you're cheating.
pull. All right, coordination. It's good? It's good, all right. Hold on to the ladder for me, please.
Looks very dramatic from up here.
I'm getting enough resistance here, sorry. Hey guys, can you hold?
Raise. Hold it.
They got it. There's two guys on it.
Okay. I'll try it this way now. Boy, this is kind of steep.
Do you want me to try?
No, I got it.
Pretty flexible.
I'm in position. Oh, wow. I see mummy.
Sure you do.
Oh, and it goes down even deeper. Man,
See any gold? Beautiful things?
I see a picture of Madonna.
Oh, wow. Tony sees a picture of Madonna.
Oh, man. Man, this thing is deep. And it's filled with rubble.
What about Mona Lisa? Is there Mona Lisa?
Man,
I
you
doubt
know,
it.
we're sitting on top. Gosh, this thing is deep. Gosh almighty. This thing goes down forever.
The shaft or the tunnel?
There's a hole down here that just goes down. Man, oh man, good thing I didn't try to dig this stuff out. Because there's a big...
One hour tomorrow.
No, you need... it's like...
Give me your face. Thank you.
I can draw you a picture of what's down there. It's like this huge space. And all of this right here is sitting on top of a huge hole.
What?
Yeah, it's like there's this huge space underneath. Underneath this is like this huge space that goes back and goes down. And all along this wall is just rubble. I see pieces of mummy. Okay, this is exclusive footage inside the newly found burial chamber. Newly found shaft in the tomb of Karakamun. This is the area where we found the inscription that read, his brother. So this may in fact be the shaft of the brother of Karakamun. We won't know until later. The pieces of mummified remains, as well as some coffins with some inscriptions on them. So we'll have to take everything out before we know exactly what it is we have. This is me inside of newly discovered burial chamber of Kawakamo's brother. I guess we're about maybe 20 feet or so underground. Just inside of the burial chamber, there are remains of a mummy, there are pieces of coffin, and there's also debris left behind by the notorious Rasul family. Feel like average white band here, picking up the pieces. Pieces of animal bones, human remains, bamboo, pottery, some pieces of coffin, and some modern debris. So we'll have to give you a greater report later on once we sifted through everything and we know exactly what we have. At the moment, this is Tony Browder, representing the ASA Restoration Project here in the newly found tomb here on the site of the tomb of Kushite. The Kushites of the 25th dynasty introduced a new phenomenon in tomb construction in Kemet. They introduced temple tombs, where they connected temples to tombs so that the living could come through the temple into the tomb to honor their ancestors. Because in African culture, it is known that as long as you speak the name of the deceased, they will continue to live. As long as you pour libation and leave food and other offerings, their soul will continue to live and be of assistance to you when you call them. So we have many examples of this. We're excavating here in the eastern entrance to the tomb, the temple portion of the tomb. Now, I left in mid-July to come back to the States, but my colleague, Dr. Pistakova, has been sending me regular updates of what they have been finding. And I want to share with you pictures that have never been seen before in the United States. These pictures have not even been published yet. So, this is the area where they're excavating in this region here at the eastern entrance to the tomb. And just 3 weeks ago, Dr. Pistakova sent me these photographs of the top portion of a door and other carvings that they found as they dug down about 9 feet into the earth. She was particularly excited about this image here. This is a picture that she sent me just last week after they completely excavated this entrance to the tomb, taking it all the way down to the floor level. I understand that they just recently found a niche which probably leads into another room off the temple portion of the tomb. We're about to wind down our season on September 15th, so we'll shut everything down and continue our excavations when the season reopens in May of next year. We work 4 months out of the year, May through September. But this particular design here was of interest to Dr. Pistakova because she said that this design with these concentric circles is a design which has never been seen in any temple in Egypt before. It's something new that the Kushites introduced into Kemet. Here's a close-up of that same design. Now, it just so happened that I was at a festival in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago and saw an African jeweler who had a piece of jewelry with the same design. And when I asked him what it was, he said it was a Adinkra. It is considered to be the first and oldest Adinkra symbol. It is a Adinkra symbol associated with rulership, kingship, and leadership. And so it's quite possible, brothers and sisters, this is new territory now. It's quite possible that the Kushites introduced this design into Kemet, and then later as these Africans migrated to the west, they brought this knowledge and this design into Ghana. Because in Ghana, among the Akan, they acknowledged that their ancestors came from the east, came from the Nile Valley. So this is new territory. Now, I've been in Chicago, my wife and I have been in Chicago for about a week now. And we were driving down Lakeshore Drive when we saw that.
Wow.
I don't know what that means yet, but I guarantee you by this time next year, I will have an answer. This is on Lakeshore Drive, right near 18th Street, and it's only on one side of the drive, in one area of the drive, on the western side of Lakeshore Drive. Just as this symbol is on the western side of the eastern entrance to the tomb. So we've got some research to do. Our ancestors are speaking to us. They've left symbols for us to identify, to wake us up, to prepare us for something that is coming. We have to do the work, we have to open our minds, we have to free our minds first. And Dr. Hilliard was the person, was the master teacher who taught us how to free our minds. One of his most significant books is a book entitled Sept, The Reawakening of the African Mind. First, we have to realize that we've been brainwashed. Then we have to reawaken our mind. And then we must become Sept. Sept is a Kemetic word which means wise. We gain wisdom through study and teaching. It's not enough to learn on your own. You have to demonstrate or share what you know. And it's through that process that you become wise. It's through study and teaching that you gain sia or insight, wisdom. And it is that wisdom that will free our minds and free all African people. The Asa Restoration Project is dedicated to the restoration of the Kushite presence in Kemet. We would tell their stories, and the preservation of the legacy of Dr. Asa G. Hilliard III. I will make certain the generations behind us will know this great man, will know of his accomplishments. Because that is how we commemorate, we celebrate our ancestors. We're looking for people to support our work. We're looking for people who are willing to make a tax-deductible pledge of $120 or more a year to help us raise funds to continue this excavation. It's going to take us about 5 to 7 years to complete the excavation and to restore the tomb and open it to the public so that when people come to Egypt generations from now, they will be able to see the tomb of Karakoum, and they will see what African Americans in the second decade of the 21st century did with their resources, which they did to recover their legacy and to share that knowledge with the world. This is not black history, this is world history. What we're also looking to do is to take people with us to Egypt during the summer to participate in the excavation. We're there for 4 months. We're looking for people who are willing to make a 2-week commitment to work. We work 6 days a week, 6 hours a day. We need people to help us do photography, videography, to help us do registration, data entry. You don't have to be an Egyptologist. You don't have to be an archaeologist. We need people with a desire to help resurrect the history of their ancestors. And we also are seeking to establish cultural circles. This gathering this evening is a cultural circle. It is an opportunity for us to come together and to talk about our history and culture, to raise our awareness so that we would be willing to participate freely in uncovering the story of our ancestors. The Asa Restoration Project is available to anyone. It is a 501c3. You can make a tax-deductible contribution via PayPal by going to our website, asarestorationproject.com or ikg-info.com. You can make a check payable to IKGCC. We would love to count you among those who are making a contribution or who are spreading the word and helping us bring tools and supplies. We need drills, we need stone cutting saws, we need sandpaper, we need a host of items, computers, printers. Anything that will help defray our expenses helps the project. We have colleagues who work for corporate America who make a contribution to the ASA project, and their company matches their contribution. So there are many ways, many creative ways that we can support this work and help to ensure that the world knows of Karakoum. And so one of my proudest moments was a moment I experienced on Wednesday when my wife and I went to Champaign-Urbana. I gave a lecture at Champaign, but prior to the lecture, I met this group of students here who had come to Washington, D.C. in April of this year to take our Egypt on the Potomac tour of Washington, D.C., our field trip of Washington, D.C. We showed that America's founding fathers were inspired by the legacy of our African ancestors, and they literally hid this admiration, this knowledge, these symbols in plain sight. So we showed them how to decode knowledge and information that is hidden in plain sight. And these students, after taking this 3-hour field trip, were so inspired, they came back to Champaign that they created a museum. And they took the essence of what we taught them, the essence of what they read in my book and my daughter's book, and created a museum with 4 different rooms filled with exhibits that they designed. And they spent their summer as docents, sharing this knowledge with the citizens of Champaign, Illinois. I was so proud to walk into this exhibit and hear myself as a high school student teach me my history. It was one of my brightest moments, one of my proudest moments. And so I understand very clearly what introducing our youth, our children, to their history does to them. It frees their mind, because for some of them, for the first time in their lives, they see themselves in history as people who count. And they see that their story does not begin in slavery, but they see it is the first story ever written by human beings on the planet. It inspires them to no end. And so what we want to do is to educate students and adults all around this country to prepare themselves for what Will Smith is about to do. Will Smith is one of the most highly paid actors in Hollywood. He has a production company, and he currently has in production a film that would tell the story of this man. You may not know him now, but I guarantee you by 2013, when The Last Pharaoh comes out, you will know about Taharka, the last major king of the 25th dynasty. Will Smith will play Taharka, the longest ruling king of the 25th dynasty, the same dynasty that we're excavating. So our goal is, through the excavations, through the cultural salons, through our books, we will spread the news about Karakoum. We will spread the news about the 25th dynasty, so that when this film comes out, we will flock to the theaters and guarantee that The Last Pharaoh will be #1 in the box office the opening weekend. I submit to you that if Medea Goes to Jail can make $35 million in one weekend, The Last Pharaoh should make at least $50 million. That's our responsibility for all of our ancestors. Every single person who struggled so that we can get a decent job, struggle so that we can get an education, struggle so that we can live in a penthouse. We owe it to them to honor their memory and to see to it that there are positive portrayals of their heroes and sheroes on the silver screen. Now, as I wind down, I want to let you know, I want to inform you, I want to prepare you for what I know is also coming. There's a new book which came out in April of this year called Black Genesis, The African Origins of the Pharaohs. Written by two men, Robert Bravall and Thomas Brophy. Robert Bravall is an independent Egyptologist. Thomas Brophy is an astrophysicist.